So, we have Nick Oleary, Senior Lecturer in Physical Education at University of Wolverhampton. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
My background is that I've been at the University of Wolverhampton for nearly 14 years. Prior to that, I was a secondary school teacher for 18 years, working in the northeast of England, the southwest, London, in addition to the Midlands.
14 years. Nearly the longest member of staff here.
Nearly.
Some of us have been here slightly longer. The love of the Midlands, it doesn't get a good press, but it is actually quite nice to be here. What you have done your doctoral studies over that period of time. Tell us a bit about your research, Nick.
Well, the research came around as a result of two factors, and in many ways it's very similar to what we tend to tell students at undergraduate level. One, pick an area that's of relevance to you, that might be of interest, and then through reading, latch on to something that somebody else has opened the door to, and you can continue walking through that door. And I was very interested in finding out why I taught the way I did, what were the factors that influenced me in terms of how I presented learning to children in schools. And I was fortunate enough to find a paper that got me started, very simply.
You've got to have the name of the paper, Nick.
And the name of the paper, or the authors, were
the ideas in the paper.
Hasty and Kinchin, 2008. You're testing me.
Not testing at all.
And it was something to do with the sport education model, but I can't remember the title.
Well, when you read that, because I know what you mean, and you read these things, they really connect to your interests and everything else. What was that moment like?
A bit of a relief, because I'd gone into doctoral work having completed a master's many years previously, and so I was a little bit out of academia, shall we say, and was fortunate enough to secure a post here. And so I was a little concerned about what I would eventually do with regards to a thesis. I think two things. One, the paper interested me, and I could kind of generalise with that paper back to my own career and how I taught. And secondly, I wasn't put off by the horrendous phrase that you hear about doctoral research, that it has to be original and groundbreaking and so on, and originality can be just moving something forward in a small way. And that paper did both for me, and it kind of opened up possibilities of where I might go with a doctoral study.
That bit on the originality sounds really tough, doesn't it? It sounds really tough, but isn't and groundbreaking also presents what looks like a massive hurdle. If every PhD was groundbreaking, was really original, almost get the feeling there'd be nothing left, wouldn't you? That knowledge, knowledge and practice haven't shifted that much. People say to me about sports science, they said, well, for all that research in sports science, why aren't we scoring more penalties? And so on. That the relative contribution in terms of practice is not there. And really, when you draw that back, is because originality around the PhDs is a creep in research, isn't it? It's part of our expectations.
I think it is, but you've also got to recognise that the research that you do, even if it is original in some way, shape or form, then has to evolve into some form of practice, hopefully, out in the real world. And the real world is extremely conservative in many ways, and education is probably as conservative as they come, in the sense that schools have been inundated with various policy documents in terms of how to deliver and what to teach the kids. And yet if you go into a typical classroom or even a typical physical education lesson, it's not too dissimilar to what I received as a kid in the 1970s/80s.
And the challenge, from my memories, I would go in with lots of good ideas and lots of intentions which are pedagogically based, and just struggle to keep Billy from climbing up the wall bars when we were meant to be doing gymnastics, or actually that wouldn't be too bad, or keep someone on the same pitch, which represents, I mean, the people doing PE, obviously, anyone doing teaching. So that part is such a massive challenge where when you go and observe a lesson, sometimes you miss that bit of what's the.
I think it is. I think it's more difficult if you're a relative beginner, a newcomer to teaching. I think once you become more experienced, then you can focus a little more on the effect you're having on the kids rather than just trying to maintain control. And the research that I look at tends to show that. Beginner teachers are focused very heavily on behaviour and keeping them busy, happy and good. Whereas more experienced teachers are more concerned potentially with the influence they have on the pupils themselves.
Good. Just keep going on that. Tell us how that really works, because.
Well, the two areas that I kind of do research on is instructional models, innovative ways of teaching PE. But the major thing that I look at, which has come about due to the doctoral work, is trying to ascertain firstly how teachers teach, and secondly what factors influence them to teach the way they do. And then having found that information or data, how could we then potentially look at what's gone on in their past experiences and their current experiences and improve the situation for like-minded teachers, or indeed themselves, at that point in time. So the research does have a reason for doing it, as opposed to just research for research's sake. And I find it interesting because I'm always relating it back to myself. So in many ways, although it's useful for others, there is a selfish thing that says, well, actually, I do want to find out why you do what you do, and what are the reasons for it.
I mean, we teachers take a bit of a bashing, particularly from government agendas to take a bashing, calls for better teaching. And better teaching is often described almost through the outcomes, and that seems to miss the bit to me. It's not almost what you're not. So, how can we better inform what good teaching looks like?
Well, it's very, very difficult because without getting too political, we're in a neoliberal political agenda at the minute, which focuses very much on tests, outcomes, scores. The process has been diluted, and the product is king. And it really comes down to a philosophy of what you think education is about. And many academic scholars believe that in most state schools now, children are not being educated, they're being trained to pass the test.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And often, as university lecturers, we often comment that they arrive here wanting to be filled up with knowledge rather than us educating them on how to learn effectively. And that, to some extent, I think has probably been lost in education.
Against the backdrop of the world is you have to be quite a good independent learner to manage Google. The very people who come into our lectures wanting to be spoon-fed a specific bit of knowledge have got their phones, which they've all learnt to use without the manual. So my great ones are this: they said, I can't do anything until you show them. And I said, well, you've got these technical things here. What manual did you start with that? And it's all experiential, trial and error.
Very much.
And which is all, is that, I mean, I always thought sport was always... I
think the issue now is that as you rightly say, you can Google everything. Or you can Google nearly everything. And the issue is one of, are you interested in the process of learning, or are you merely interested in learning rote facts? Those that are running the businesses, those that are in creative positions, are good at problem solving, working with others, social skills. Those that are merely pushing the buttons are being trained. And there may be something to be said about different stratas of education, those that are in private and public schools as opposed to those that are in state schools, and what their roles potentially might be in society.
Whew, heavy going.
Wow. You thought we were going to talk about physical education.
Well, we are. What projects have you got going on at the moment?
Currently, I have had a paper come back from the European Physical Education Review, which interestingly was co-authored by one of the students here. And not surprisingly, it's got lots of red pen on it. So I've got some adjustments to do with that, and that's going to be resubmitted, I hope, in the next couple of weeks. I have a paper.
Does the student get involved in the...
The student's been involved in not only the initial research, but also the writing up and so on and so forth. So
were they expecting?
No, they weren't.
Were they expecting, because they look up to you as lecturer, and they don't really, because I often find when I've done this, they don't get just how brutally our work is in the review process.
Well, I've done this with I think 3 or 4 or 5 students now. I had a paper published last year on cooperative learning. With 3 undergraduate third-year students, and I've had 2 papers with a master's student published just recently. So, it can be done, but like you say, we give work back and they're not happy, and we get work back and we're not happy. But you go through the process, and hopefully it does improve the quality of what you eventually produce. It's a bind.
What I say to them is that when you ask an academic for an opinion, you'll get one. All right.
Precisely. I always remember what you finally said. Don't worry about it coming back, and don't expect to put it through and it to be perfect. Part of their job is to improve it for you. Yeah. And I find that difficult, because I still try and put in a paper that's of the best quality I can. But I have learned to perhaps relax a little bit and let the reviewers do a little bit of the work, because I've unfortunately found myself reviewing papers now, and I'm doing the same job as other people are doing on me.
But, I mean, the other bit to reviews is, you can take them awfully personally, but the other bit is when they really have a go, is to say what was in there that allowed them to construct that argument. And then you go, what would I want anyone else to... Well, if this was published, would I want anyone else to have that view? And you go, actually, I'll rewrite it so it's less likely to form that view. And it actually becomes really positive then.
Yeah.
Because you think, well, they've misunderstood things. And you go, and you go, they've misunderstood that. Don't they do this? But actually, if you say, well, if I redo it so I minimise the likelihood of... then you actually it comes quite positive.
I think so. Yeah, it's a bind while you're doing it, and you're right, because you do look at the comments and why have they not understood this? Why do they? And then you think, well, in most cases, not always, but in most cases, they have a point.
I always think they've always got a point, because it's in the same way that it's what they bring to the party. Yeah, and it's sometimes you can't change that, and quite often they get the reviewers. If the reviewer doesn't, but you just think, well, how do they come to that? How did somebody say, I'm interested in that, and come up with that view so different? Yeah. It does offer, just because what you don't want is that person going out to conferences and going, God, did you see? Which allows you to come back. So and the students they don't really get just the level, do they? Of review of articles, how much it's a jump up from their own work.
It's huge, and I've found it huge. And I think, like an ex-colleague of ours, I remember an ex-colleague of ours remarking that he looked back on his doctoral work and thought, maybe it's not as good as I thought it was when I did it 2, 3, 4 years ago. You still make that leap onwards and upwards. And I think the paper that we've just been talking about that's been knocked back, I thought it was the best paper up to this point that I've done. And it's probably been the one that's been most heavily criticised since I got the doctorate. So maybe I don't know as much as I thought.
Well, maybe you're taking a bigger risk. Maybe the gamble about what you're trying to say is
possibly
is slightly, it's challenging, and you get conservative reviewers looking to either protect their territory, because it might well be, and so on and so on. But But I think that's all part of the game, isn't it? To test the extent to which you can be bold. It's a lot happier to do these things without an award lobbing on the top of it, isn't it?
Oh yes.
And around it, so you can put these difficult papers in and see what happens. So, if students were interested in doing M level or doctoral work with you, what sort of things would you be?
Well, first of all, physical education generally. I wouldn't send any student away that had physical education or education. Somewhere in and amongst it, I would be interested in talking to them. Specific interest would be firstly and primarily around why and how teachers teach the way they do in certain aspects of the curriculum. That could be an activity, it could be a specific way of teaching, it could be teaching a specific group of pupils, special educational needs students, for example, of which I'm doing a study at the minute. Or it could be something to do with the way innovative instructional models such as teaching games for understanding, sport education, cooperative learning are taught, and the problems and issues of using those instructional models.
Okay. Always reminds, when I was teaching, I just taught volleyball the first term, and I thought they taught that you're just teaching volleyball, and the reason being is that it means your preparation's that much different, that much easier in a kind of way. But what it showed me is that one lesson at one time of the day worked with one group of people. The other time, it absolutely didn't work, and there's so many factors that are coming into that I didn't really get at this time. It took me a while to get it. One class that came, I think they came from RE, right, and they were unteachable for 15 minutes because they were just too angry.
So how did you teach them?
Oh, we just used to get the balls used to come out, and we had almost quite a lot of action going on right to start with. So the idea of trying to get them to set the nets up, which was the first thing, going into the cupboard in organised format, really wasn't working. So they'd get going, get into groups, start knocking balls up, start practicing, and then one group would then go to the cupboards.
So the emphasis on physical activity and getting them going was a result of the nature of those children.
Yeah.
So there's the factor, potentially, in that particular one lesson that had a major impact on how you then delivered.
Another constraint would be how that school put their equipment. And the cupboard was an utter nightmare. Right? The cupboard was a nightmare. This really organised cupboard, but really small for 25 kids coming out, which is all the challenge, isn't it? So you come in with the idea, there's your lesson plan, but actually that requires such good in-out, not going into the stuff mucking about. But I mean, they had to get going. There's quite a few lessons where they'd come in really just totally disaffected. Yeah. That made me try to do what worked well one day, wasn't working well the other day. And obviously, as a school PE teacher, I went through several lessons where they were disasters in order to realise
we all did
to change that. So it's really practical. It's applied, taking practice and applying it. School teachers currently teaching, would you encourage them to do doctoral study?
I think probably what would be advisable is, before you even think about potentially even a master's, is to get a few years under your belt as a teacher. And what that then gives you is it gives you a good grounding in the reality of what you're doing. And it can then be useful to take the theory on board. And without getting too academic, it's reckoned that it takes between 5 and 7 years for you to grasp and become a competent teacher, whatever that is. I'm not necessarily suggesting somebody should take that long before they contemplate further study, but I think it's a good idea to do a few years and then contemplate a master's. I think you can put it into context. And also, you can research potentially areas that are of interest to your own job.
Quite difficult to find time teaching, isn't it?
Absolutely, but I did it. I did the masters while I was a school teacher, and it was tough. And I did the doctorate while I was lecturing here, so it can be done.
I think so. I agree, and I think it's why you've got to, as what you said, get your research informing around related to what your practice is. So those ideas that whilst you're teaching a lesson, you go. That they may not occur at the same time because you're embracing what you're embedded, you're totally concentrated on what you're doing. But later on, you can reflect.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, a lot of undergraduates or people, not undergraduates, people that have got their degree will be concerned about that jump to masters and or doctoral work, and they shouldn't, because we're still saying the same things. Find something of interest and find something that ignites you. Yeah. Once you've got that interest, and once you've got that, and you kind of know where you're going, and if you got a competent supervisor that's been there and done it, I wouldn't say you're halfway there, but you're off the starting grid. In a big way.
Yeah, no, good supervisor who picks you up when you're feeling down, when your papers get rejected, stands in your corner, says it's okay. There's still 2 rounds to go, and provides opportunities. So, thanks, Nick. Any final thoughts?
No, but thank you for your time, Andy. It's been an interesting discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick, and we'll be back again shortly.